Olá, sejam bem-vindos todos. Vou falar em português primeiro e depois a gente vai conduzir a entrevista em inglês e vamos depois fazer a legenda para vocês poderem acompanhar em português. Mas só para fazer a introdução, então, a Lei de Benford tem sido utilizada por alguns auditores para investigar se houve fraude nas eleições do Brasil. E o nosso objetivo hoje aqui é explorar o que é a Lei de Benford, como ela é utilizada na prática para fins de auditoria e os indícios de investigação vindos dessas auditorias merecem uma investigação mais aprofundada. É para responder essas e outras perguntas, entrevistar o especialista que está aqui com a gente hoje, Burke Files, que é internacionalmente reconhecido por investigação de fraudes e é fundador da Due Diligence Organization, presidente do American Anti-Corruption Institute e lidera uma empresa internacional de investigação financeira que presta consultoria para mais de 135 países. E ressaltamos que hoje a nossa conversa vai ser técnica, né? Então, portanto, sem viés político. Now, in English, for our international crowd over there to listen to us. So, the Benford law has been used by some auditors to investigate if there were fraud in the elections in Brazil. And today we're going to explore what is the Benford's law, how can it be used in practice to investigate fraud, and how does it, what further investigations are necessary for us to have a more accurate report. And to answer these questions, we're going to interview today Burke Files, the specialist in fraud investigation, which is internationally recognized. Burke is the founder of the International Due Diligence Organization, president of the American Anti-Corruption Institute, and leads an international investigation firm which does due diligence consulting in over 135 countries. And today our conversation is going to be technical, and we are going to stay away from any politics. And now I'll just do a quick countdown for us to start our live, and we'll be back in 10 seconds.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? This is a global transmission. Hayek will be live in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Enjoy the show.
And we're back. Welcome again, everyone watching us. Please feel free to bring all your questions. If you have any questions for Burke, just write in the comments on wherever you are, Facebook, YouTube, or LinkedIn, and we're going to see it here. We can stream it live and ask it for Burke. So just to start, Burke, what is the Benford law anyways, and how is it used to detect fraud?
Benford's law is, they call it the law of the first digit, and that in a Bayesian set of numbers that the number 1 will be the first digit about 30% of the time, the number 2, 17, the number 3, 12, some odd percent. And it makes sense. If you take a look at the effort to go from $10 to $20, you essentially have to double your $10 to get to 20. That's a lot of effort. But to get from $20 to $30, you only need 30% more effort, not 50% more effort. So whether this be in finance, in water levels, growth of trees, utility bills, Benford's law is a tremendous insight into numbers and their relationship with one another. The use of Benford's law is there not, wait for this, not to detect fraud. Benford's law identifies selection pressure. Now, could selection pressure be fraud? Absolutely, it could be fraud. That's when you're selecting for the money to come to you. Over the time, I guess I probably use Benford's law 2-3 times a year. And it's all attached to finance. And a couple of different cases. One was the client had purchased a plastics company, and we went through in a fairly comprehensive fashion the distributions made by the different clerks on behalf of the salesman. And what we found was one salesman padding his expenses. It's a very funny story I'll not tell. Another salesman who was essentially buying the business from his clients. He was getting full rack right and everything else. And then one distribution clerk had some very large checks that made no sense. And it was actually quite sad. His son was very ill and needed a operation. And he had stolen the neighborhood of about $75,000 to pay for that operation. And I'm sorry to hear this. His child didn't make it. But on top of that, he supercharged his Ford Explorer, got an expensive Spanish tile in his house, put in French doors. And I get what was happening. It was checkbook therapy. He was buying things to fill the hole that the child left. Another one was looking at distributions of a company. And in the Benford's Law distribution, there was an extraordinarily large pop, if you will, at the $600 and $700, or at the 6 and 7 position. The Benford's Law distribution provides a fairly, I have to do this backwards, smooth curve of distribution. I should go more like this, a smooth curve of distribution. I'm doing it backwards and I'm doing a terrible job. This is why I try paper, but I won't focus on it. So it did not fit the curve at all. So, my compatriot goes, well, there must be fraud. I said, no, there's an indication of selection pressure. When we got further down to it, it was actually pretty funny. It was the company required that any check over $800 requires 2 approvals. So what the clerk would do is a bill that's maybe $1,500, they'd send out one check. They send out 2 checks that totaled $1,500, as opposed to getting the second signature. So there was an artificial selection pressure to avoid getting the second signature.
So let's take a step back there. So
Sure.
On that case specifically that you showed, where you found the problems with the clerk, you had a large sample of data, which you ran to find anomalies using the Benford's Law.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens afterwards? How could you just run us through the process of how it works from getting the data to finding the problems?
You're looking essentially for tightness of fit, that the distribution of first digits fits closely to Benford's Law. And that if it doesn't fit closely, why is that? Benford Law tells you to ask the questions. It doesn't tell you the answer. So you have to ask the question, why is the sample of data from a company incongruent with the Benford's Law distribution? And where is it incongruent? Typically, you'll find it'll be in the 2 to 3 or the 7 to 8, where the selection pressure will pop. It just seems to be that way. That's my experience. I don't know what the mathematical reason may be for that. But then you have to look, why is it? I used to do the due diligence for a fund, a hedge fund that bought defaulted credit card debt. Big banks sell their credit card debt through wholesalers for around 4 cents on the dollar. These are people who had credit cards that the bank charged off and then sold the debt. And I would look at portfolios, and there was a couple of things over the many years I did this that I started to notice. One was a portfolio that fit Benford's distribution quite well, but at further look at it, there were 11,000 debtors, and not one of them owned a home. What is the likelihood not a single person out of 11,000 charged off credit cards doesn't own a home? It's minuscule. That told us that the wholesaler was creaming the homeowners for their own private portfolio and selling off the rest. I can't blame them, but that's not an unfiltered portfolio. So we quit shopping with them. Another is we got a Benford's Law distribution that did not fit at all. It had a significant spike around 8 or 9 for the first digit. So we pulled the data apart and we ran it from $999 under for Benford's Law distribution and $1,000 and over for another distribution. Both of those came up perfect, almost perfect congruence with the Benford's Law distribution. What that told us is that this wasn't a single portfolio from a single bank, but a blended portfolio from 2 different banks. One of them was JP Morgan Chase, and the other one was Capital One. Capital One is a bank or a credit card company that specializes in giving second chances. Almost all of those credit cards have a limit of $500 to $800. So what happens is I get the people who had problems before, get the new credit card, they run it up to $500, $800 and walk away. Absolutely impossible to collect from them. No one wants to buy their debt. No one wants to even have the debt gifted to them. So, I pushed back on this to the debt wholesaler, and he goes, "Oh, that's not true. No. It's just JP Morgan Chase." No. He called me back a little while later. "How'd you know?" I said, "Because I'm pretty good at the due diligence. This is why my client hires me." So what they're trying to do is, they're selling you a basket of apples, and the bottom ones may be a little rotten. So they're just kind of slipping them in there to get them out of inventory.
Fantastic.
I hope that gives you an idea of how it can be used.
So I think in essence, you find signals that something might be wrong somewhere, and then you further investigate.
Correct. Correct. It doesn't say there is a fraud. In one case, there were several frauds, and the other 2, it was selection pressure that had nothing to do with the fraud. One was nothing to do with the fraud, and the other one was being a little cute.
It's a way to save time, I guess, instead of having to audit everything, you just go to where there might be.
That's actually a very good description. What you're doing is you're applying a test to see if you have to look, and if you do have to look, where to look.
Great. And when it comes to elections, which is the theme we're talking about today, we just had a presidential election that went by this Sunday in Brazil, and it was very tight. You've probably been following it, and there has been some people who've been using the Benford's Law to try to find things in. And how does it work when it comes to election data? Can the Benford Law be used for election data? What is your opinion on that?
Not really. There's a fair body of evidence going back to, 2010, where they've used analysts have used Benford's Law to test election results. Afghanistan, Iran, Mexico, Russia, United States. And what they found very quickly is that it has too many false negatives and false positives. And there's a good reason for that. Any election is an opinion market, number one. Number two, there is a problem with selection pressure. 3, there's a problem with us humans, the way we vote. First of all, let's start with a Bayesian versus non-Bayesian number, which is one of the problems. A Bayesian number is a number whose value is not dependent upon any other number in that set. the height of trees. The height of a tree in Mexico will have nothing to do with the height of a tree in Florida, or even the height of a tree a few feet away. That's a Bayesian number. The value of checks is a Bayesian number. It's fixed. You can write a check for 200, another check for 1,000. If you write a check for 1,000, does that mean that check for 200 might actually be worth 210? No. That's a Bayesian number. A non-Bayesian number is where the values in that set can impact the value of other numbers in that set. Where might you see this? You'll see this in the stock market. The value of one retailer going up may bring the other retailer up as well. If we were neighbors and I had a whole bunch of Appalachian collectibles in my front yard, you know, some car doors, parts of a refrigerator, tin things, cans, bottles, and some type of animal in there that growled at night, but you couldn't actually see it. And I lived next to you, whose house would be more valuable. Yours would. But the fact that my house is in disrepair and has a front yard filled of Appalachian collectibles, you know, Burke, you need to clean that up because you're dragging the price of my home down. That's an example where two values in that same set impact one another.
Great.
Just to continue on this little rant. Any election is an opinion market. I can sway the opinion of those people around me. Maybe, maybe not, but it's possible. Also, when we go to vote, what happened if you had 12 votes in a row, 12 ballots in a row that were identical? Does that sound suspicious?
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it does sound suspicious. How could that happen? Well, maybe there's a bunch of little old ladies that all agree on what they're going to vote on. They've talked with one another and they all go down and cast their ballots at the same time. Doesn't that sound perfectly normal?
That's why the numbers are not random.
Yes.
As we would expect.
Yes. And then you have the additional selection pressure of the different districts in which the votes are taken. Different districts have different demographics. So there's selection pressure in how people vote. There's selection pressure by the design of the different districts. There's a whole bunch of selection pressure impacting those votes long before they're even cast. So a vote total does not present a Bayesian number, but rather a non-Bayesian. Rather, they're trying to use a Bayesian method on a non-Bayesian number. And you can't do that. That's how you get blow-ups on a hedge. I remember it was about 6 or 7 years ago, JP Morgan lost a couple of $1 billion on a hedge. A hedge is supposed to protect you from risk.
What is a blow-up on a hedge?
I'm sorry. That's when a hedge is supposed to limit your risk, not the risk. So if the price of homes went down, the hedge should have gone up. Well, what happened is the price of homes went down and the hedge went even further down. And that's because the model they used, they built a Bayesian model to analyze non-Bayesian values. And they got it wrong. I'm sorry, I'm diving deeply into the weeds of numbers.
No, this is very interesting. So yes, the people with a statistical background are having a great time there.
So, you know, is it something wise to value, is Benford's law something wise to value the price of art? No. Price of stocks? No. The distribution of, and manner in which people vote? No. Because they're non-Bayesian events. It's like imperial and metric wrenches. Some of them look alike, some of them don't. Some of them don't fit, some of them will.
And Burke, so when it comes now, speaking about elections more generally, and your background with investigations and uncovering frauds, how would you then go about investigating an election to see if the numbers are actually what people voted when they went to the ballot?
First of all, I share that I live in Tempe, Arizona, which is part of Maricopa County, Arizona, that had a gut-wrenching audit of all votes in Maricopa County. It was the first time it was ever done. Could it have been done better? Yes. Could the two parties have paid attention and acted like adults with the outcome? Yes. They didn't. They didn't. What we found in the audit, and what has been found in subsequent audits in other states, is that the election officials are not abiding by the law, such as being required to cull voters from voters lists when they move or when they die. I think it was one county in Pennsylvania had more registered voters than they had in population. You know, a bunch of dead people. Why didn't you call them out? And
they were actually voting?
A few were. We had, I think, about 600 dead people vote here.
Wow.
Yeah. You know, I've watched elections and election fraud and corruption for 15 years. I had a wonderful friendship with one of the top international election observers, Bruce George, who helped overturn the Georgian and Ukrainian elections because of substantial fraud. And as he said, you know, every election has a little fraud. The idea is to get the fraud down to where it doesn't change the outcome. And I remember when he was campaigning, he told me the story of he walked into a restaurant in his district. And in the back, the owner said, "Oh, Mr. George, come in. We're doing something for you." And he goes back, and there's about 80 ballots that one guy is filling out on behalf of Mr. George. We're making sure that all of our friends vote for you. It's like, no, you can't do this. So he had to report, people doing that for him, and he goes, "Oh, there's 80 votes gone."
We have an interesting comment here from Charles. I'm going to share.
Sure.
Charles from Kenya, he says, "I thought the problem of dead people waking up to vote and back to their grave was only in my country. Now I know better."
Oh, Charles, bless your heart. I remember teaching in Nairobi not long ago, and we were talking about anti-corruption and election fraud, and one woman said, "That's nothing, Mr. Files. My father was helping to count the votes when the power went out. A ceiling panel opened up, and a box of new ballots crashed in, and as the lights came on, we could see the ceiling panel." He said he could see the ceiling panel go back.
So this is interesting. This is an interesting conversation because whenever we see problems here in Brazil, we think it's only in Brazil. And then Charles is seeing problems in Kenya, and then you see problems in the United States, but then we realize it's a worldwide problem.
Well, it is. I mean, fiddling with elections began with the first election. I have no doubt of it. And, where do we expose ourselves to election mischief is as we change the methods by which we vote. Because the fraudsters will stay up all night long figuring out how to game the system, while the rest of us actually have lives and jobs.
Mm-hmm.
I've come across here in Maricopa County, one guy with a couple hundred ballots in his car. And what he was doing, he was going around to the people that were very poor and offering them $20 to have them sign the ballot, and he would vote for them. Does that happen a lot? No. Does it happen? Yeah. I mean, we are no angels. We are very human beings. And when we're in a contest, we want to win.
And what is your opinion, Burke, on electronic voting systems? In Brazil, we have a one electronic system which we put our votes in. And it's standard all across the country. And at the same day that we finish voting, it counts the votes, and the results are accounted for right on that day. The speed is good, but what are your opinions on an electronic type of system like the one we have?
One method of counting ballots I find to be insufficient. North Korean hackers are going and robbing coin exchanges and banks. The Chinese hackers are doing the same. The Russians just admitted, so we already knew it, a couple of days ago, that they're fiddling with and trying to influence foreign elections. So let's not pretend that there isn't outside influence. There is, and it's malevolent. And what it tries to do is it tries to set the country against one another. Either pick their candidate to win that they can work with, or set the forces, the people inside the country, against one another. And we just have to be attenuated to that. Why do I say there needs to be more than one system? Because an all-electronic system can be fiddled. It can be hacked. And you don't need to put in a massive amount of votes to win. You just need to have one more than the other guy. And, the old joke when John F. Kennedy was running for the presidency against Richard Nixon, it said that his father, Joe Kennedy, was so rich that he would fund Kennedy's victory. And Kennedy came up and he grabbed a piece of paper and he looked in the podium and he says, I have a letter from my father. My father says, son, I will fund your election, but I will not finance a landslide.
We have an interesting question here from Alencar Schaeffer Jr. putting on the screen. Fun for you to figure out, Burke. How do you hack an offline system?
I like that. You print more ballots. And that goes into election security. A paper ballot shouldn't be more than an 8.5 or A4 sheet of paper that you buy in the stationery store. That ballot should have security measures in place that are akin to a stock certificate. There should be both visual anti-counterfeiting features as well as machine read only anti-counterfeiting features. Let's see how quick I can get here. I'll hold this up. I need more of them. Please send them to me. This is a 20-euro note. And this has visible anti-counterfeiting features here. There we go. Like these foils, the stripes, the stripe within the bill that tells you the denomination. But it also has invisible machine read only anti-counterfeiting measures. I think those would be very valuable in any and all ballots. Another is it's redundancy. You have your electronic count. Great. That gives you an indication of the results. You have a hand count. Great. If they're close, good for you. If they're not, now we got to figure out why. In my state, there are 2 counties that said after the ballots have been electronically transferred to the Secretary of State's office, that they were going to hand count them. The Secretary of State said, we will sue you to stop a hand count. Why? Why does it matter? That bugs the heck out of me. Why does it matter? And in any important process, there needs to be an audit. Do we audit every election? No, that's crazy. But might we select some places for an audit randomly and others purposefully, and then have that audit, that voting process audited? Now, we're not there. An audit is not there to change the election, which of course is everyone who wants to fiddle an election says, oh, the audit is there to change the election, denying the will of the people, blah, blah, blah. The purpose of an audit is to make sure that the policies and procedures are followed, that there's none untoward pressure, and to examine the policies and procedures and to see if they can be improved. An audit is a test of function and reliability. Why do we have our municipalities audited? For the same reason. Why do we have our public companies audited? For the same reason. It's trust, but verify. And there's nothing wrong with an audit. It's not there to change the outcome. It's to test the processes and procedures in place. The audit should be reasonably transparent, apolitical, and not run by an arm of the government or one of the big auditing firms. It should be a firm or a group of people that specialize in auditing elections. And I would invite participants from the general electorate and or the different parties to participate in the audit.
I love that quote, Burke. Trust but verify.
Yeah, I mean, that's an old expression.
No, we're not.
And I'm not talking.
Trying to go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not talking about just Brazil. I'm talking about all elections. We look at elections that obviously had problems in Latin America. Well, let's say Venezuela. And here you have the problem in a popular election. The United States is a republic. Most other democracies are either parliamentary or popular democracy. Sometimes you have the problem of one man, one vote, one time. And elections aren't supposed to be organized. Elections should be rough and tumble and messy. Why? Because that's how we as human beings sort it out. And do some parties deserve to lose elections? Sure. They deserve to lose elections, usually because they've lost touch with the electorate. You want a real clean election system? Try China's. Very orderly, very peaceful.
Or North Korea, maybe.
Yes, at least it's a stable kleptocracy.
That's okay. We get it. We have to do audits, right? But it's nice and beautiful when you have a board of directors in a company, which demand that there must be an audit to audit whatever the CEO is doing in a company.
They're required to have an audit every year according to Securities and Exchange regulations. It's not they choose. It's nice. They have no choice.
Yeah, they're required. And there is oversight by the board of directors, which is doing the audits for the company. So it's more organized, let's say, in the company who should be. But the problem is when you get to the state, there's a power struggle there, and there's narratives, and there's always people blaming others. Oh, you're doing that because you want to win the elections and not me, and so it's always people yelling at each other and going through all directions. So what would you say are the best practices to go about doing an auditing routine in the general elections, like in a country as big as Brazil, the United States, as you're familiar with?
Well, first of all, I found that it's the old question about having a disagreement. And that is, if the law is in your favor, quote the law. If the facts are in your favor, quote the facts. If the law and the facts are against you, pound the table and yell like hell. And, the first thing I see in politics, when something happens they don't like, is you have this screaming blame game. And I know the screaming blamers are the ones to exclude because it's all emotion. It's not based upon fact. And those people are used to divide us as Americans or as Brazilians, not to unite us behind our country and our fellow citizens. If I had a magic wand on election integrity, I have a magic wand, but I've lost it in my garage. I would begin very simply from a bottom-up approach, ask the voters what they want to see. It's their democracy. It's not top-down. We know in management that top-down can sometimes backfire real quickly. So we begin with them. What do we want to see? I would make sure that there are two methods of counting. However those two methods come together is wonderful. There should always be redundancy. Why? It makes the system robust against fraud, theft, or error. You can lose an election by error as easily as you can by fraud or win. So we need to put in the redundancy to avoid fraud, theft, or error. As I said before, the ballots should be a secure ballot on paper that is almost impossible to copy. And it should have both visual anti-counterfeiting features as well as machine read-only anti-counterfeiting features. Does it cost more to print those? Yeah, and it's worth it. There definitely has to be a segregation of duties with a bit of overlap. Why? If I'm doing all of it, Stalin never said this, but it's a cute T-shirt. It says it doesn't matter who votes; it matters who counts the votes. I saw that T-shirt the other day. It was pretty good. and we have to be mindful of that. So we have to have redundant systems, and it's better to have many local systems than a single system in place. Why? Because the locals know what's going on. The locals will know the mischief before you or I do. So imply that local knowledge. I know that's very Hayekian, but I had to go there.
Great stuff. Let me ask.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
A question. So, who should be in charge of counting the? So you talked about segregation of duties, right? There's so whenever we talk about elections, where there's the operating the elections, which is the logistics of the ballot and how everything operates. There's the oversight if everything's going well, and there's also the judging if any problems occur, if what should happen, right? If there's any issues. And today in Brazil, all three of these are in one institution, which is the TSE, the Supreme Electoral Court. Here, if I'm translating it well.
I get that design. The courts are supposed to be above the fray and independent. And I respect that probably most of them are. But take a look at hedge funds or mutual funds. They realize that a single point of control is dangerous. So when you put together a hedge fund, you have the fund manager, the fund custodian, and the fund administrator. The custodian and the administrator are separate from the fund manager. Why? With the trioca of parties involved in overseeing the fund, it is harder to defraud the investors. I would separate an election between the people who design the election, people who run the election, and people who count the ballots. So you have an election department or group that designs the election. They get the signatures in to get people or initiatives on the ballot. They design the ballot, and the moment those ballots go out, they're done. Those ballots are sent out by the people who run the election, and they run both mail-in ballots as well as the balloting locations. And after everyone has voted, they're done. And then a third group counts the ballots. And I get the idea that it's easier to do it under one house, but the difficulty presented by separating it into three parts also increases the reliability of that outcome, that outcome will be true and faithful. And you should include members of the electorate in the organization. You pay them for whatever, 2-3 months of work or whatever it may be, but have them participate in the process.
Members of the electorate, you mean the people who vote, or
the people who vote? Yeah,
also participating. And yeah, the way I see an analogy we can say is it's easier if you have your accountant also do the finances and the accounts payable, accounts receivable of any given company. But that's probably not a good practice, right, Burke?
Yeah, I have many a case where the accountant, the either outside or internal accountant, was heavily relied upon, and they stole from the company. I have one woman who stole about $500,000 from a plastic surgery firm. And when I was asked to come in, he said, "Oh, I'll have my accountant meet you here. She hasn't taken a vacation in 2 years." And the response was, And under no circumstances am I to meet her, see her, or have her there. I mean, that is a hallmark of fraud. I have another company several years ago where the accountant stole a little money, not a lot, but he was also a criminal. And what he was doing is he was using the company to run stolen money through. So you made a check out to XYZ company. It's great. He had opened up 5 accounts under XYZ company. One of them was a legitimate account. The other 4 weren't. The other 4 were there to launder money. Oops.
People are always people anywhere.
Yeah, they give us a rule, we'll figure out how to get around it.
We have a question here from Charles. I'm going to put it on the screen. And also, if anyone has other questions too, please feel free to send. We can have a Q&A session. So Charles is asking, Charles again from Kenya, is asking, how do we demystify political leadership? People are rushing to occupy political positions in a cutthroat competition, and you wonder why?
I don't wonder why at all. It's, as I've seen many times in elections around the world, when the parties change hands, the new victor goes, it's my turn now. Charles raises a side note about political corruption. And I've got 2 books coming in front of it, but the 3rd book off of my desk next year will be on corruption and why people are and how they become corrupt. And there's not a corrupt society per se. Individuals choose to be corrupt. Why? Because they make money and they don't think they'll get caught. And there are people that are drawn to power. And if you take a look along the scale of empathetics to psychopaths, it's a bell curve. The empathetics are the ones running usually the ones running the charities and, adopting too many cats. And then you get to the center where most of us are. And as you get towards the end where you have a more psychopathic tendency, these are the people that tend to run large companies, are very successful, and tend to go and run for office. It doesn't mean they're crooks. It just means that they are that cunning and that willing to push themselves there. Now we have to take a look at the environment in which they enter. And there's a great Russian proverb, if my boss pretends to pay me, I'll pretend to work for him. So the people that get into office need to have a compensation package that has both carrots of being well paid and well taken care of, and a stick that if you're found out to be corruption or steal, you lose all of that and more. Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore caught on real quick that he didn't pay the representatives weren't paid enough. And making something incredibly simplified that was more complex, he essentially said, hey, we're going to give you a lot of benefits if you're a civil servant. And that is discount rates on mortgages, your health care is covered for, a generous retirement program. And oh, by the way, if we find that you're corrupt, you're going to lose everything. You're going to lose your house, you're going to lose your retirement benefits, you're going to lose your health insurance, you're going to lose any type of stipend we might have given you to help your children get educated. You lose it all. Then you look at a Filipino tax inspector. I think the last time I looked, they're getting $300 a month. Or an Algerian judge who gets $1,400 a month. Why are they taking that job? Because they get the benefits. Mr. Edson, you've not paid your taxes. Quite correct. I see that you owe over 500,000 pesos. We'll make a little deal, Mr. Edson. You pay me 100,000 pesos. I'll reduce your tax burden to 150,000 pesos, and we've cut your problem in half. We have a deal? The answer is, of course, yes, sure.
We have a saying in Brazil, which is people who create difficulties to sell the facilities.
create the disease and sell the cure. You bet.
Sell the cure. Yes.
And that goes a lot also into laws. Hernando de Soto did a beautiful job in Peru looking at why the corruption was so bad. And he tried to set up a tailor shop, he and his students, and he realized it was almost impossible to set up a tailor shop because there were so many laws. It's legislation for facilitation. The more points of contact that you have with the government to get your licenses, the more likely you are just to hand over a couple of soles. And when he did set up this one tailor shop legally with all the permits, inspectors still went in and wanted their bribe.
It's a great book, The Mystery of Capital, right?
Yeah, why capitalism succeeds in the West and fails elsewhere, and the one before that was The Other Path. It was dealing with the Red Path. What was that? The Other Path. It was a Maoist organization, and he figured he was making a lot of success with The Other Path when they quit blowing up government buildings and started blowing up his building.
Yeah.
So, getting back to Benford's law is a great test of Bayesian numbers. It is not a reliable test of non-Bayesian numbers, opinion markets, and that includes elections, values of art, and even in stock values. And it doesn't say there's a fraud. Benford's law says there's selection pressure. And looking at any election, there's selection pressure going back 2, 3, 4 levels.
Mm-hmm.
So while Benford's law may be indicative of an upset, meaning someone's upset with what came out in the report, I would not put a lot of credibility in it.
Okay.
All the studies have shown it's not terribly reliable, and that it has too many false positives and false negatives to bet on its outcome.
Yeah. And I guess we can summarize here what we talked about today. And so Benford's law would not be probably the best form to go there. And if there something shows up, that you still need to do many further investigations on the numbers. And there are other forms of investigations which we talked about here, which can be depending on the context further. But it's always important to audit and to welcome the verification of any electoral system.
Yeah, and it's understand that this problem with Benford's law is not Brazil's; it's global.
Yeah, it's the human nature. Human nature needs verification. To put it that way. All right. Any last words, Burke?
Not really. This is really kind of fun. It was fun reading the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone who watched us. I'll speak in Portuguese for the people who watch us too. Obrigado por todo mundo que assistiu a gente hoje. Nós vamos colocar as legendas em português depois, tanto no YouTube quanto no Facebook e no LinkedIn, para vocês acompanharem a live na gravação. So, thank you very much, guys. And I will just run a quick ad now on our MBA, and hope you can also check us out online, Hayek Global College. We have an awesome place. Burke is our professor, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Think back to when you were a child and recall the eagerness to explore what lied beyond. Education was a medium to conquer the world. But now you're an adult, and it all boils down to grades and exams. What's the point? A diploma? Maybe networking with people in your neighborhood? Just forget about all that. Business happens far beyond your country, and your childhood dream is now only a click away if you join us on the Hayek Global MBA, an online, truly international, and practical program designed to equip you with the tools to literally lead world-class teams. Earn a Hayek Global MBA. Own the world.